I don't know if it's something like you have to go in and just like delete the A from or what.
All right. Make sure we get. I should probably pull up our chat here. All right. Are we live? I think we're live. You'll. Oh, I gotta get rid of this. Nobody yet? Looks like we're live. Cool. Oh, we got one person in there. Yeah. Welcome, welcome. Give everybody a minute to file in here. 2 people. Welcome. Okay, one person still. We'll get Dr. Nick in here shortly. Welcome everybody. Welcome back to a live Q&A with Patrick and myself. I'm Ian. This is Patrick here from LiveAquaria in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Shortly we'll be joined by Dr. Nick. He's probably going to be in California this week, I think, right? Or do we know that?
Yeah, I think he's out there for a little while.
Still out in California. So he's all over the place doing his thing. But Patrick, Dr. Nick will be here to answer some of your questions this week, as we do every other week here on Facebook. So we've got a list of questions that have already been sent to us via the form on the website. I did add that as a feature link to this live Q&A. So somewhere in this live chat, there should be a live or a featured link that you can click on. If you don't happen to find it, I'll be sure to add it to the comments after the fact. But that's a great way to get your question to us for future live Q&As. If you've got a problem with your aquarium, if you're just not really sure, maybe you're trying to figure something out, you can send us your question and we'll do our best to answer it live here on Facebook. As I mentioned, we do this every other week. So this week we've got a series of questions here, and then we are also willing to take questions from the live chat too. So if you have a question right off the top of your head that you haven't sent to us, feel free to share it here in the live chat as well. While we wait for Dr. Nick to join us, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Patrick, how long on average does it take for a subadult emperor angelfish to change into a full adult?
Okay, so a lot of marine angelfish, they actually, is Dr. Nick?
Yeah, there he is.
They have completely different juvenile patterns as they do as adults. So as they transition from a juvenile to adult, they'll actually, that juvenile coloration will fade and you'll see the adult coloration start to take over. So it's kind of cool to see when they're in between. So I think that's what this question's all about. So there are some variables here. So I mean, depending on the size of the tank and how often the fish is fed and what they're fed and so on, will determine the growth rate of the fish. So if it's in a larger aquarium and it's fed more often, the fish will grow quicker and you know, thus it'll transition quicker. So under ideal conditions, it should transition within a few months, sometimes longer. And in smaller aquariums, it'll definitely take a lot longer. So, I mean, it is a good sized angel, and it should be in an aquarium that's probably at least 8 feet long. So if you're doing a bigger tank, it will be much happier and it'll grow quicker.
Awesome. So it looks like we're having some technical difficulties getting Dr. Nick in here. We'll do our best to get him in here as soon as possible. Actually, let's see if we can get him in now. All right, still some technical difficulties, but we'll continue to work on that. 1 second, folks. Gotta love it doing it live. All right, well, we do have a question from the chat here from Dean. He says, good question. So I have my tank and my calc and mag are through the roof, and I don't seem to be able to bring them down. Any advice? My levels are, phosphates are 0.08, nitrates are 20, nitrate and ammonia are 0, alka 7.5, specific gravity 0.025, tank is a reefer 350.
Yeah, you're probably going to have to start using a different salt that has a much lower calcium and magnesium level. I know here in the coral farm we've used a lot of different salts, and from batch to batch, well, from brand to brand, obviously we've seen differences, but also from batch to batch, because we would mix it up. Well, we would order it in by the pallet, and each pallet would have a lot number, and we would test just, a box off of that lot number, and we would get kind of a baseline. And some of the lots were actually a lot higher than previous lots and whatnot. So I know, for instance, one that we had a big problem with magnesium was reef crystals.
Reef crystals. Yeah.
Yep. And so we went away from that, and we went to our salt, which has a much lower level. And it's a lot easier to bring it up than it is to bring it down. So what I would do is I would start using a different salt, and I would get small batches of it and test it to make sure that the calcium and magnesium levels are within an acceptable range, so that we can start to bring it down.
Awesome. Dean says you moved from an Aquaforest probiotic to one here in the UK called Aquatics. So hopefully that helps you, Dean. Thanks so much for your question. Thanks for tuning in, of course. And welcome, Dr. Nick. Thank you. Looks like we had technical difficulties, but we got you in. So good to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what the problem was. It was giving me the invite, but then we weren't getting linked together.
I blame Facebook.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So great first questions. Thank you, Dean, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Next question actually is for Dr. Nick. Periodically, my discus and angelfish develop cataracts. How do I prevent this?
Okay, that's a good question. I see cataracts a lot in fish. I work with a number of public aquariums, and we'll see older fish get cataracts. So a cataract is the lens of the eye starting to get cloudy. And that can occur from a number of different reasons, one of which is just old age. So just like people can get cataracts, so can other animals. So we do see cataracts in older fish. And the outer surface of the eye is still clear, but the inner pupil where the lens is where the whiteness is. And fish lenses are round, so you'll actually see a little round white marble looking thing inside of the eye. That's a cataract. So if you're seeing that in the eye, it could be age related. Now, if it's a young fish, there are a couple other things that can cause this. Parasites can get into the eye and cause a problem. Now, if it's a parasite in the eye, you will see more than just the lens being cloudy. So if you see the surface of the eye or the whole eye being white, as opposed to just the lens in the center of the pupil, then it could be a parasite. There's some different species of parasites, including flukes and worms, that can get into the fish's eye. And so that's something to consider. Now, in an aquarium, that's not as likely as a problem. So what I would consider for a home aquarium causing cloudiness of the lens would be a nutritional deficiency. And there's several different things that can cause this. If foods that are high in certain types of protein can cause lenses to get cloudy, so you want to make sure you're getting a good quality fish food. Deficiencies of different minerals such as zinc or magnesium can also cause the eyes to get cloudy, or a deficiency of histidine, which is an amino acid. So if you're using a good quality fish food, that shouldn't be a problem. One other thing to consider is rotating fish food. So you're not feeding the same food all the time, but feeding, like a live food, a frozen food, a flake food, a pelleted food, just a variety of different things over time, so that the chances of having any one nutritional deficiency is decreased. And so if it's a home aquarium and you're seeing cloudy eyes and young fish, I would look at nutrition. And then one last obvious thing would be trauma if they're fighting, especially with cichlids. You mentioned angelfish and discus. They're usually more peaceful, but some cichlids can get pretty aggressive and they could even bite at each other's eyes. But that would be superficial trauma around the whole surface of the eye, not the actual lens. Does that kind of cover it right there?
Sounds like
so,
it.
yep.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for the submission. That submission did come from our website. Just as a reminder, there should be a featured link in the live stream for today, but you can also head on to liveaquaria.com, click on to the homepage, and there is a banner a little bit further down where you can submit your question, and then we enter it into a $25 gift certificate. We're giving away 4 every other week, so take a look at that and get your question in. It's a great way to get entered. All right, on next question we have, do you have to run bright light in your reef, or can it be blue all the time? Patrick.
Yes, this is an interesting question because a lot of times when you go into fish shops and such, you'll see their reef tanks, their frag tanks, their stock tanks, whatever, and they'll be bright blue. So, you know, that's great for presentation, but to keep the coral there, you know, to keep the coral at that spectrum of light for long term is not the greatest, because you will not have optimum growth, and you definitely will not have optimum color from your acros. They'll actually turn brown. So you want to make sure that you are giving them, you know, a much better Kelvin, you know, so anywhere from ideally 14 to 18 Kelvin would be good. You know, that way you get some nice bright whites in there and stuff like that. But you'll also get a lot of blues, so you'll still get the really bright colors as well. But yeah, I mean, short time is fine, but you want to make sure that you increase the light to make sure you get the best amount of optimum growth out of your coral.
Cool. Dr. Nick, would you like to add anything to that?
Again, as Patrick said, depends on the species of fish and corals that you have in there will determine the best light for them. But when you're trying to look at them, obviously brighter light makes them easier to see. So it depends on whether you're trying to have photosynthesis or just trying to look at them. And, you know, you can adjust your light, especially with LEDs. You can adjust the intensity of light. I have on my tank an LED that I can operate with my phone, so that I can increase and decrease the colors, the intensity of the light on an app on my phone. So that's, you know, if I want to look at the fish or have people over and see the fish, I can put on bright light. But if nobody's around looking at them, I can put on different colored lights. So you should be able to just adjust the lighting for your own specific purposes, you know, whether you're looking at the fish or trying to allow photosynthesis for your zooanthellae.
Yeah, and that actually kind of segues into something we've done recently here with our divers and corals, or we tried to do, is to provide that actinic view as well as that more of that natural white light view. So some of you may have noticed lately that within our divers and corals, we've included an inset image. We've sort of changed the primary presentation to more of that blue actinic lighting, and then we've also had an inset image of the white lighting, just to provide more of an idea to the consumer, like how these corals may look under different types of lighting. So I know a lot of I would say trendy ways to show corals today is that very like bright actinic light where the corals can really sort of glow, and it's really, really fantastic and really looks good. But at LiveAquaria, we've always kind of felt it necessary, kind of Patrick, is to provide it in that I would say key spectrums or really beneficial spectrums to the coral, as well as having natural light to show it's what it typically would look like or should look like. So yeah, if you haven't already checked out, go check out Divers Den WYSIWYG store on liveaquaria.com. We've got a great coral selection, lots of great corals out there, and you can kind of now see that different presentation of different lighting scenarios. This next one I'm going to pitch to Dr. Nick. What's the best freshwater plants for beginners?
Okay, yeah, so plants are great. I highly recommend, especially freshwater aquariums, obviously, using live plants in your tank. Most of the time they'll thrive. If you get a good reference or find a reference online, it'll usually tell you about the plants, how hardy they are, and how much light they need. So for beginners, you might not have very wide spectrum lighting or fancy lighting. If you just have average lighting in your aquarium, there are a few plants that will do really well. I personally have had very good luck with Anubias. It's a hardy plant that grows under a variety of different conditions, and there's a different sizes and varieties of Anubias, so you can get some different looks on those. But they tend to do well in different water qualities, different lighting. So it's hard to go wrong with them, and they grow fairly slowly, but grow for a long time. They're also very thick, sturdy plants, so they're less likely to be eaten by herbivorous fish in your tank. Some of the other ones that are pretty good also would be, let's see, some of the other species that are easy to grow. would be cryptocorns, and you can buy cryptocorns sometimes as bulbs or sometimes as growing plants. They're not as hardy as Anubias, but they come in a variety and they do pretty well, and they also will tolerate low lighting, so that's important in some situations. Some other ones that are good are the crinum, which are the onion plants. They're kind of, you know, long, stringy, grass-like plants, so they can get really, really tall. And so if you put a bunch of them along the back of the tank, that can make a nice background. And the crinum is available as a bulb also. When you're buying the bulbs, you want to make sure that they're not hard and dried out, but they're also not moldy. And if there's any way of asking how fresh they are, that's important too. But you can buy these bulbs available at pet stores, and they usually will grow pretty well once you plant them. And they come in also different species, very narrow leaf to very wide leaf varieties. So those are good ones to start out with. And then when you're buying plants, there's also packaged that come in tubes that are out of the water. The nice thing about the tube plants or the culture plants is that you don't have to worry about pests. They don't have snails. They don't have protozoa or problems if they're coming from an aquarium with the fish they might have when you're bringing them home. But be careful. Some of the tube plants or packaged plants are actually terrarium plants and not aquarium plants. And when you plant them in your aquarium, they'll grow for a little bit and then they'll kind of just die off. So read the packaging carefully to make sure that they're plants that are, even though they're out of water when you buy them, that they will live in the water and do well once they're planted in the aquarium. Some of those plants have different leaves. So when they're above the water, will have one type of leaf, and then when you plant them, those leaves will seem to die, but a new leaf form will develop. So that's a consideration, that the plant itself isn't dying, it's just switching over leaves. So you should have good results if you're buying some of those tube plants. The tissue culture plants and the bulbs work really well, and with those you don't have to worry about them bringing pests into your home aquarium. If you're buying plants from a dealer that keeps, you know, live plants in the water, that can certainly be good. You probably want to have a tank that doesn't have fish in them to grow the plants, so you don't have to be concerned about diseases coming from the fish. But even if they do, when you get them home, there's a couple things you can do. You can rinse the plants in, you know, some of the fish chemicals like potassium permanganate or a formalin solution. You can make up a medicated solution, rinse the plants in that. Then they should be safe for your tank. You can also quarantine them, put them in an empty tank with no fish, let them grow for a couple of weeks under bright lighting, and then transplant them over into your home aquarium. So a lot of different things to consider. And there are lots of good fish books that have plant information on them, telling you the lighting, the amount of pH, which usually is not as a big problem with plants, but definitely lighting is a concern.
Awesome. Great explanation. Thank you, Dr. Nick. We got another question from the chat here from Dean. Also, hopefully everybody can hear us okay. I see there's some comments about sound. I would say, I think we're getting sound okay on our end, but check out your sound on your end just in case you're having any issues. So Dean asks, any recommendations for a good setting for mixed reef using Ecotech G4 Pros? Actually, you know, we use Ecotechs here.
Yeah, we have several generations of Ecotechs. That question we'll probably have to get back to you on, because we do use them on our grow out vats and such, but I don't control them. Steve does, our maintenance manager. So he's out constantly fiddling with them too. So, I mean, I guess it would be good if you were to include type of coral that you have, depth of water and so on, because ours are suspended about 2.5, 3 feet above the water as well too. Yeah. So that's going to take into effect, you know, the setting as well. So
great question. Yeah, we'll do our best to get back to you on that, Dean. Another one from Kara. I got a question. She has a 35-gallon saltwater setup almost 2 years ago. Constant problems with ammonia, nitrate, and phosphates, not usually nitrite. What do we think there, Patrick?
Okay, so we have, it sounds like maybe a bacterial imbalance here, so a biological filtration issue. So it could stem from several things. It's probably a combination of them. It could be overfeeding, in the sense that the fish are getting fed too much, or maybe they're dirty eaters and then making a mess in the tank, and you want to make sure you remove any uneaten food. Water changes. If there is a high amount of ammonia in there, we could also be changing too much water, removing too much of the beneficial bacteria from the tank. Filtration, there may not be enough biological filtration in the tank, in the filter. Saltwater tanks, you can usually supplement really well with, adding live rock, because the live rock is very porous. There's a lot of beneficial bacteria growing on that. But you also need to have good circulation in the tank, because the water needs to flow over, through, whatnot, so that the beneficial bacteria can do a really good job. That's why in a filter, the water is constantly flowing through it, bringing nutrients to the bacteria, oxygen, and so on, for that cycle. So that would be your ammonia problem, and then nitrate is the end product of the nitrogen cycle. So that you would be removing when you do water changes. And changing your filter and whatnot. Phosphates, that could be a water source problem, the water that's going into the aquarium. You want to make sure that that is, filtered well. If you're using reverse osmosis water, that should be taking all the phosphates out. Or the reverse osmosis system should be removing the phosphates from the water. There are some foods, maybe really inexpensive salt mixes and stuff like that may be actually adding some phosphates back into the tank. I know some buffers are phosphate based, that could be contributing to your phosphate levels as well. Yeah, I guess it really depends on the type of fish that you got in that tank too, because that's not a very big saltwater tank. If you have a big messy triggerfish or eel or puffers or something like that, that just might be too much fish for that volume of water.
Awesome, thank you. Kara, hopefully that helps you. Next one is from Dean. When it comes to skimmers, would you get one that is suitable for the tank volume, or get the biggest thing possible, or the biggest you can?
I always like to go oversized for sure. I feel like you can really control the amount of skimmate that you get by how much the water level in the skimmer. So if you want a really diluted solution, you can run it that way, or a really concentrated solution as well. So I would always get an oversized skimmer for sure. And I mean, you could probably go as much as double. And it really depends on, I guess, the inhabitants too. I mean, if you have really big, dirty fish, you definitely want to go oversized, because that skimmer is going to be working overtime.
Hopefully that helps, Dean. Thank you for the question. This next one is for Dr. Nick. Do I need to quarantine? I feel like we answer quarantine one at least every week or every time. But then we got this other question: quarantine inverts such as snails, shrimps, or crabs, and how long?
So that is a good question, because you don't think about them carrying diseases like fish do, but they can, especially with some of the things like saltwater cryptocarian or freshwater ichthyopterias, where there is a portion of the life cycle that does not live on the fish, and those can be in pretty much anything in the environment. So they can be in gravel, they can be on the plants, they can be on other invertebrates. So if you're bringing new invertebrates into the aquarium, it would be ideal to put them into a separate home aquarium, isolation aquarium, before you put them into your main aquarium. And maybe 2 weeks is sufficient, because based on the life cycle of most of the protozoans that have cycles off the fish, 2 weeks should be sufficient. 4 weeks is ideal for quarantine of fish, and but 2 weeks might be sufficient for the invertebrates. If you don't have the ability to quarantine them, just ensure that they're healthy, they're active, they're crawling around, and then when you put them into your aquarium, monitor them very carefully, and monitor your fish afterwards. There really isn't any disinfection you want to do on a live animal like you can on the plant. So we really just recommend a quarantine, and keep them away from fish during that quarantine period. And then if they're doing okay, move them back into your aquarium.
Yeah, always quarantine. It seems like that always comes down to quarantine and observation before addition. So,
and you can also make sure that they're active and eating before you put them into the aquarium, where they might hide and you never see them again, or they only come out periodically. So if you don't have them in a isolation area where you can monitor them, you don't get to really see how well they're doing before you put them into the aquarium.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great question too, because in marine aquariums, a lot of people, like Dr. Nick was saying, that the inverts can actually be kind of a host for a specific life cycle of these parasites. So I know with clams, especially, anybody who keeps clams out there, if you add any snails to your tank, you want to make sure you definitely quarantine them, because they'll actually bring in hitchhiking pyramidal snails that will prey on the clams. Well, they prey on the snails too, but they'll actually come in on the snails, because a lot of people will keep clams and they'll never have a problem, and they add a few turbos or whatnot, and all of a sudden their clams are starting to die, and it's because of the hitchhikers that came in on the snails. For sure. And also pinch mantle too, they say can come in on snails as well. So any clam keepers out there, you definitely want to make sure you quarantine your inverts.
Very interesting. Another question from Dean. And Dean, real quick, no worries with all the questions. That's why we're here. Happy to have them. How many other questions you have? So his questions with TDS, total dissolved solid measurements. Would you take that from the output of the RO unit or the measured within the barrel? I measure 0.00 out, but up to 0.15 in the barrel.
We measure it here straight out of the machine to make sure that the machine, our RO machine, is working properly. So that's where I would measure it. As for where you're getting the stuff from the barrels, I don't know if there's some residual or if it's from the salt mix or whatnot. I mean, there's got to be something residual in the barrels. But I would be checking it straight out of the machine to make sure that it's properly. And if you're getting 0.00, sounds like it's working. Because I mean, even up to 0.01, is somewhat acceptable.
And over time, the RO membrane will diminish capacity for retaining and removing the minerals. So by periodically measuring the output of your RO filter, you'll know when it's time to either clean or change the membranes in your RO filter.
Yep. Yeah, because once we start getting to like 0.02, then it's like, all right, we need to, it's getting done this week.
All right, another one from Kara in the chat. I'm getting ready to upgrade to a 75-gallon with a sump and a skimmer. The 35-gallon, or my 35-gallon, uses a fluval canister. The fish in the tank are an engineer goby, six-line wrasse, scooter blenny, lawnmower blenny, coral banded shrimp, serpent star, banded brittle star, emerald crabs, and serious snails. That's it. And my husband is determined that we don't need a quarantine tank. So I think this is kind of back to your question before
about the ammonia.
35 and the ammonia problems, nitrates, phosphates, not usually. Hopefully maybe that kind of adds a little bit more to your answer there. But definitely always recommend getting a quarantine tank.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah, and one thing about, with that bioload is you have to consider the aquarium a balance between what's producing waste, what's eliminating waste. Okay, so you have the food coming in and you have the fish all producing waste. You can manually remove some of that waste by gravel vacuuming and by water changes. But if you're not doing that enough, you'll see ammonia, nitrite, phosphate, all those things start going up. So the other way to remove it is with the biological filtration. And the capacity of the biological filtration has to be adequate for the volume of fish and waste that's being produced. So as Patrick had already mentioned, it's a matter of how big is your biological filtration. You may just need either a bigger canister filter, bigger flow, better oxygen, because the biological filter requires oxygen to perform. So if there isn't enough oxygen, that may be part of why you're not getting good filtration. As Patrick mentioned, using things like live rock has a lot of surface area, which allows a lot of bacteria to grow. But you have to have the right type of bacteria also. And there are some supplements you could buy of live bacteria that maybe you could add that will put the the beneficial bacteria in that break down, you know, the nitrifying bacteria that break down the waste, and the heterotrophic bacteria. So you have to be sure your water flow, your aeration, your pH is correct, because if the pH is too high or too low, it reduces the effectiveness of the biological filtration, and temperature as well. But in obviously in a home aquarium, we're probably at the appropriate temperature. And then just the surface area for the bacteria. So you may need a bigger filter if you're not getting adequate nitrification.
Cool. Thank you. So we're going to take time for 2 more. We're just about at time, but I saw some questions in live chat here. We want to make sure we answer these for you guys. So Dean is asking, is it true that running a low specific gravity in your aquarium can lessen the effect of disease? I think, Patrick, you've got some typical day-to-day husbandry skills here.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking, I guess it depends on how low you want to run it. I mean, if you're keeping reef animals such as coral and inverts and stuff like that, you really can't go much lower than, you know, 1.022, because they're not going to be very happy. But that's not really low enough to have a lot of effect on diseases like marine ick and flukes and so on. You have to really drop it down to like 1.014 to maybe 1.015 to really have any effects on flukes and marine ick. And at that point, you can really kind of snuff it out. I mean, you still need to probably, if the fish is heavily diseased or you know, covered with parasites, you're still going to have to use a medication, you know, a copper-based medication or whatnot, but that will help it from really going rampant in the system.
Yeah, and different diseases have different tolerances of salinity as well. So what you're trying to do with the protozoa is, by lowering the salinity, you're causing an osmotic imbalance that will cause the invertebrates, as they get into, well, as the protozoa as they get into lower salinity water, to start absorbing water and pop open and kill them. But that same thing can happen to your invertebrates that you don't want to kill. So that's why it's very important to keep the salinity in a safe level. A lot of fish have a tolerance to lower salinity, so you can use that for either a short-term or a longer-term bath or a dip to using, you know, fresh water or low salinity water to help rid parasites off them.
Great.
Yeah, any fish that come in with flukes and we put them in our quarantine system that is that low, you'll actually see overnight the if they do have flukes, they'll actually start to puff up, like Dr. says, and they'll actually well, I mean, you can't see them explode, but that they get irritated and they'll actually fall off the fish and die.
Awesome. So we got some shout outs to you guys. Kara and Dean, both thanking you guys for answering your questions. Dean says thanks for the answers. Kara says thank you so much for the opportunity to ask questions. She just doesn't get the reliable answers at a local fish store, sadly. But yeah, you can always rely on LiveAquaria. We're here to help you, whether you pass us your questions for these live streams like this, or if you just want to reach out to us directly on social media, we'll do our best to get the answers and the right answers, the reliable answers to you as quickly as possible. Kara's also asking, when you say aeration, do you mean using an air stone?
No, aeration would both most, you know, a marine aquarium. I mean, you could use an air stone, but it's going to make a mess. You're going to have salt vapor and creep everywhere. So I would not recommend doing that. But surface agitation, the more surface agitation, the better. That's going to force CO2 out and oxygen in. And just circulation in general. So just moving the water around. Because if you have stagnant spots in the tank, the bacteria is not going to thrive in there. You're going to have dead spots. It's going to make your whole problem worse.
You have to make sure that the water at the surface of the tank gets to the bottom, and the water at the bottom gets to the top. And so if you have if you're using, for example, a canister filter, and you have your inlet to the canister filter and your outlet either fairly close to each other or both on the bottom, you're going to get a very limited circulation. So you want your inlet to the canister filter very low and your outlet very high, so that it's pushing the surface water and then moves it down and circulates in the tank. And even though there's no bubbles, that's where the aeration occurs, at the surface layer between the air and the water, that little thin film gets oxygen absorbed, and then you're moving that around the tank, so it's spreading that oxygen around.
Cool. Also, some additional love from Christopher. He loves LiveAquaria. Thank you so much. Happy to have you all here again, answering your questions. We're going to take one more question from Jason. Gents, what is up with the price of Copepods? Those things are tiny. I have a Fowler tank and just wanted to add them as a cleanup crew. Do you recommend them for this? What are your best practices? Thanks.
Well, I don't know. I know, Dr. Nick, you're working a lot with this. You might be able to answer the price of the Copepods. No?
Well, so we are in the process of starting production. So we'll have to wait and see how well that goes and what the future holds. But maybe as production increases, prices will become better.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like predation with copepods is tough. You know, in an aquarium, you know, the big ones prey on the little ones and so on. So you need to give them a lot of places to hide. Generally, when you buy copepods, there's generally only the adults you can see with the naked eye. I mean, if we were to take it to a microscope or even a magnifying glass, you could probably see a lot more life in there. A lot of people get discouraged. They look at a bottle or a bag and like, there's hardly anything in here. It's well because there's different life stages in there. But generally just seeding an aquarium with them, you know, whether it be in a filter or a refugium or whatnot, you just got to give them kind of like a sanctuary for them to grow, because they will, like I said, they do prey on each other and the fish love to eat them. So,
Kara says, Scooter Blaine loves eating them. So,
yeah, for sure. Any, you know, small wrasse or anything, I mean, they'll go out of their way digging through the sand to find them. It's kind of a delicacy for fish. So raising them is tricky. Selling them is tricky. They're very short shelf life and whatnot. So, so it's just the whole process is tricky. Getting them to thrive in your aquarium is tricky.
So Dean's wondering, with the Copepods, can you tip these straight into your tank with the water they come in?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, generally what most places do is they recommend to put it in a refugium or a wet dry filter or whatnot, where there's, you know, the biological media down there. That's probably the safest spot to put them, so that the fish don't eat them, and it also gives them, like I said, that sanctuary where they can actually kind of get maybe a base to start reproducing. You know, because if you put them in the aquarium, the fish might gobble up a lot of the adults, and then you might have to wait a little while. If at all, if they start to repopulate or form a population in your tank.
Well, I think that concludes this week's live Q&A. I want to thank Dr. Nick and Patrick for taking time out of their busy days to answer your question. Most of all, thank you to everyone who joined us on the live stream and passed along their questions, either through the Facebook chat here or through the form on our website. Just as a reminder, you can head on over to liveaquaria.com. If you think of a question after the fact, then you can submit a question via the form on the homepage. You just have to scroll down a little bit. It's a long banner. So go check that out. Other than that, our photo contest is still going on for this month. That we are taking submissions through the 25th. So if you got a really cool photo of your aquarium that you would like to share, we're going to be giving away a $500 LiveAquaria gift certificate and then two $100 LiveAquaria gift certificates. So head on over to liveaquaria.com too. There's a banner on the homepage where you can click on it and submit your photo. There's no limitations to how many photos you want to submit. It's one photo per entry, but we'll be taking submissions through the 25th, and then we'll be announcing the winner on October 1st. On behalf of everybody here at LiveAquaria, thank you so much for your time, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.